Next, after poly strips, we have strokes. And this is probably the most powerful tool in Retopoflow, and the one I use second most after polypen. I use polypen a little bit more because it's more precise, but anything involving filling in large patches of quads is where strokes shines. To use it, similar to poly strips, hold down Control, left click and drag, and instead of creating a strip of quads, now it's going to create a strip of edges. In the redo panel, you can change the count of how many vertices are inserted, or you could also do that by holding Control and scrolling up or down. Now, once you have a selected strip of edges, you can turn that into a patch of quads in a couple ways. One is you can draw a parallel stroke, just like so. Or you can choose any of these vertices to start from, and you can see that it's snapping because the yellow ring is highlighting around the cursor. And once you have that, then you can draw outwards and extrude a patch that way. Or you could also start from the ends and define the other corners of the patch and draw out in a C shape. And again, any of these methods are going to allow you to adjust the number of cuts in between by holding down Control and scrolling up or down. Strokes can also be used to bridge between two areas. For example, if I have a stroke over here and let's extrude that over there, then we can connect these two areas by selecting some strip of edges, holding down Control, and drawing from one vertex to the next. You can see the size of the edges is very different and it's interpolated between them. When bridging, we can also adjust the number of counts with Control scrolling, but we can also hold Alt and scroll to adjust which vertex it's connected to. We can also use strokes to fill in L-shaped holes by selecting one side of the L. Here I'll select the shortest path by selecting one vertex and then Control, Shift, and clicking the last vertex. And then I can go to the other side of the L and draw out from that vertex. Again, making sure that that mouse cursor has the yellow ring around it to make sure that it's going to snap. I could also do that the exact opposite way. I could select this side of the L instead and draw out parallel that way. Regardless of which way you choose though, just make sure that you're drawing parallel to the selection. It's also possible to use strokes to do a type of grid fill. Let's say that we have a stroke here, and let's increase the number of cuts. And the same thing over here. Then let's take these edges and extrude that outwards. Then take those and extrude them up to about here. And let's say we want to fill in this section that looks like a U. Well, to do that, we just need to select these bottom edges, hold down Control, and connect two of the top vertices. We can control where these connect just by holding down Control and scrolling. So we can either go backwards or forwards. So again, that's making a selection and drawing parallel to that selection, starting and or ending on another vertex. Strokes can also be used to make rings. So if we were to go down towards this eye here and deselect everything else to start a new stroke, I could hold down Control and just draw around this eye like so. And there we have our loop. I can hold Control and increase or decrease the segments by scrolling. And then I could extrude this loop either inwards or outwards just by dragging out from any of the vertices. If I go in, that's going to be a bit cramped, so I'll drag outwards like so. Or I could also just, if I don't want to extrude evenly all the way around, I could keep this loop selected and draw a different shape like so. And now it's still going to connect those two loops, but I can be more specific about that shape of the outer loop. So again, I can either draw perpendicular or parallel. Now, Strokes has a ton of options in the tool settings, so let's look at each of them. First is the insert method. By default, it's set to average, which means that if we were to select some existing edges and then draw out from that, then the number of cuts in between is going to be based on the average length of those edges, which in practice means that they're going to be as evenly spaced quads as possible. So whether I make a stroke really close to the existing edge or really far away, we're still going to get evenly spaced quads. However, if I were to switch this over to brush radius, then the radius of the brush that you see as you hold Control is going to determine the length of the edges. So if I were to have a really small brush, then I'm going to get a lot of cuts. Let's make it even smaller to exaggerate that. like so. And if I have a really big brush, then I'm going to get a lot fewer cuts. You could also set this to fixed, so have the same number of cuts each time you stroke, regardless of whether it's close or very far away. The one time I usually find this helpful is when I need to set it all the way to 1 and I just want to make simple extrusions, so it can be good for that. But for the most part, I leave this at average. Now, when you're starting a new stroke and nothing is selected, then it doesn't have any existing edges to average between, so that's when it uses the brush size. So you can hit F to adjust the brush size, just like any other brush in Blender, start drawing, and then start extruding. Next after that, we have the snap distance, and that's how far away your cursor needs to be from an existing vertex in order for that yellow circle to highlight and for new vertices to attach to it. So if you want to make it more sensitive, then you could decrease this, or if you want it to be a lot less sensitive, then you could increase this and have it attach much more easily. I think the default of 10 pixels though is pretty good, so I leave it at that. Next we have stabilize, which is also an option in polystrips that I skipped over before. This is the same thing as stabilize strokes in pretty much any drawing application. So if I were to set that to 0, hold down Control and draw, the path is going to follow my cursor exactly. However, if I were to set this all the way to 1 and try to do that same thing, it's going to lag behind a little bit and smooth out the stroke. So this allows you to get nice, exact swooping curves without too much jitter, at the expense of it being a little bit more difficult to make sharp corners. Though you can still make a sharp corner if you wait for the stroke to catch up and then continue on. Again, the default here is pretty good, and I like to leave it at that. Next up, we have blending, and this is if you draw two parallel strokes like so, how does it interpolate between them? Let's say I increase the cut count here, and you can see that there's a nice smooth transition between the two strokes. I can adjust this either in the redo panel with the smooth blending option, or by holding down Shift and scrolling up or down. A value of 0 is going to make everything linear, a negative value is going to make it smoothed in the opposite way, and a value of 1 or above is going to add that smooth interpolation. I can also adjust the spacing here, which I don't generally need to do, but if you want to, you can start or end the loops closer or farther away from the strokes. And then lastly, we have an option for how to interpret T-strips. And T-strips is where you have a selected set of edges and draw outwards such that you're making a T. So by default, it's set to flat, which is good for a lot of simple cases. But let's say you want to draw a curve here, like so. Well, that's not going to work quite as well. So in this case, you might want to switch that to follow, and then all of those in-between edge loops are going to follow the tangent of the curve. So this works great sometimes, but again, is not always what you want, so there's an option for both. The other option is fan, and that's a lot more useful if you are starting with a set of curved edges. So for example, if we have a more complex edge like this, and we try to extrude outwards, then that's not going to work so well towards the extremes. However, if I were to switch this to fan, then it's going to use that initial curvature and extrude outwards along the normal, giving us an even thickness all the way around. So if I set this to fan, I can make a lot more complex strokes here and just extrude outwards and get a nice even thickness all the way around. So which one you use is totally up to you. They're all great for different situations, and you can pick between them at any point. And with that, that's all of the settings in the strokes tool. I know we ran through that kind of quickly, and there are a lot of gestures to get used to, but mostly just remember that you first make some selection, and then either draw parallel to that, or draw from or to any other vertex. Looks like I didn't quite hit that one, so let's wait for the yellow circle to be hovering over it, and now it's going to connect. Once you get the hang of this, then filling in empty gaps between key loops becomes really, really fast.